Hi there, I'd like to welcome you. This is week 3, Pikes Peak Community College English 122. It's the online class. I wanted to compliment you on your discussion posts. Again, they're fantastic. I'm really enjoying your work. I will get everything caught up in the grade book. I'll get your discussion, your discussion posts caught up in the grade book. I'll get my comments to you for those discussion posts, and I'll also get your analytic exercise 1 back to you in the next couple of days. They were fantastic, and I want to compliment you. You're doing a great job on the tenets of writing, thinking about things, and articulating well. I wanted to give you a brief rundown of what's coming up. We are moving into Unit 2 starting this week. Unit 2 looks at basic argument and arguing to convince. So we've looked at inquiry, we've looked at reading analytically and starting to break pieces down, components of writing analytically and images analytically. Now we're going to move into the writing mode. So you take on the full authorship role rather than a reader role. And in the first portions of Unit 2, we're going to talk about the specifics of a thesis, what it should do, what makes it a thesis that we can articulate as a thesis. And we want to think about paragraph development. We're talking this week about reasoned argument, thesis development, paragraph development. And then next week, also part of the Unit 2 section, we'll go into warrants, claims and evidence, the so what, thesis points, specifically thesis points and what they are, and then transitions and framing paragraphs. This week, I want you to look at assignment for Essay 2. That is up underneath the Assignments tab. If you haven't had a chance to look under the Content tab, the only assignment I think I don't have up is the formal final project. That's going to be a 6 to 10 page paper, somewhere in that range, with at least 5 sources. I would like you to get to 8 sources if possible, but I'll get that finished up and articulated for you this week, and it'll be up on D2L for your reference. But for this week specifically, I've got on the syllabus to assign Essay 2, which is the abstract or research proposal for your final researched argument. And I want you to think about an argument that you can construct that you need to find sources to support, which is generally any argument, but it's going to be extended. And it's also to join a conversation about the subject of your argument, of your researched argument. An abstract is a simple statement of, this is what my thesis, my argument is, and this is the research section I'm looking at. These are my methods of finding it. An abstract can be identified by some keywords. You can put that on the top part of your assignment, but it should just be 2 paragraphs. Don't feel like you have to go into more than 2 paragraphs. But the first paragraph, you're stating this is the situation that I am arguing. You give some context for that argument and why you're thinking about researching this topic, what I'm proposing to research. And then the second part, the second paragraph, is the methodology that you will use to find the research, the evidence to support that argument. So what kind of databases might you need to use? Are there specific journals that will help you? Are there subject matter experts that you know of or that you can look into, or just state simply, I need to research the subject matter experts in this topic or this subject area? Will you be conducting interviews with some people, or will you be collating data? You're certainly welcome to use any kind of data sources, databases, and you can put charts, graphs, any kind of visualization of your data, your research into your project, if that is how you want to present the evidence. That's absolutely wonderful, especially for those of you who are social science majors. If you're in the hard sciences, those are the kinds of evidence you'll be tucking into your projects and your proposals throughout your academic career. And if you go in those fields, you'll be using that into your careers. So I don't want you to feel like you can't use that kind of evidence because it's an English class. I encourage you to use that kind of evidence. So that, if you have any questions about this paper, this assignment abstract proposal, let me know. Happy to help you in any way, answer any questions. And then that I also wanted to just talk just briefly about Chris Schaefer's article that we're reading this week, Education in the Disinformation Age. And Chris Schaefer's text will be the basis of our discussion posts questions this week. But the thing that I really like about this article is it encompasses all those things we're talking about how to construct a reasoned argument. Schaefer puts in a clearly stated thesis, contextualizes beautifully the situation at hand. The argument is talking about hyperlink insertion in a text versus using URLs, and why a hyperlink is a more expansive use of evidence in a text and allows you to control. So basically, Schaefer is saying that a hypertext or hyperlink to hypertext is the language of the web, but we write in the language of scholarship, and we need to invert our thinking to start writing the language of the web in our academic work. It's a really clever, well-written, well-researched, thought-about argument, but it has all those markers we're looking at in good writing. So the argument that Schaefer sets out is clear, the thesis is clear, it has tension, it has arguability. You need to defend it. He needs to think about what I'm doing there. It has context, really spends a lot of time contextualizing why this argument, why now. It has a great so what at the end. It has several sentences of so what that build in momentum at the very end, so you know exactly what Schaefer wants you to do with the argument. The other things that I really enjoy reading that argument is looking at the paragraph structure. The choice to structure the argument in a reasoned, logical manner, proceeding from one point to the other, that transitions the signposts between the paragraphs. First, second, and then. There's also a narrative approach, a personal narrative approach. When I was working here, I came up with this idea. So he inserts self in there, which is a great strategy, gives a personalization to the audience, but also clearly articulates moving from this point to the next to the next. So clear understanding of the target audience. Schaefer really spends a lot of time finding that audience and working the argument towards that audience. So I want you to look at all those components that we're talking about this week in our writing and see how it's deployed in this it's a very small article, and it's incredibly well written, and I want you to think about why it's well written, what things you might bring as a reader to say, you know what, that works really well, but I might do it this way instead. Would you reorder the sequence of claims and evidence? Would you state the thesis in a different way? What counterarguments can you come up with? There are some counterarguments. You say, you know, but what about this? So thinking about those things, how does Schaefer negotiate that argument altogether? So that leads us into the three things we're talking about this week: reasoned argument, thesis development, paragraph development. They all blend together. We'll start with reasoned argument. A reasoned argument is a strategic activity that you do as a writer, knowing that you're going to be interacting with an audience. So again, that audience-writer connection, you're not writing to avoid. You're writing with a specific audience in mind. Now for this class, you're writing to me, and I'm sorry it's me, crazy old me, but you also have to assume that there's somebody else that might be there. So there's an elevated academic kind of audience there. But you have a specific person in mind that you're trying to convince as you're writing an argument that's towards convincing or persuading, as we go into persuasion next. So think about that, strategic. It's not haphazard, it has a specific strategy in mind, and that strategy, the strategic endpoint, is the so what. How do you get your reader, your audience, to go from your thesis, your argument, your main argument, to your so what? You have to come up with a strategy. It should be logical. That seems obvious, but can you find moments of illogic? So the PowerPoint I have up about logic and argument shows you some elements about deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, some of those logical fallacies that you see built in. So you want to keep that in mind as you're arguing. What am I doing? Is it always logical, or can there be some flaws in the logic? So you're revising as you're writing, as you're thinking. You revise your thinking as well as your writing. But keep that in mind, strategic, logical. It is also adapted to your audience. So you adapt your argument to your audience as you go. If you are thinking about it, constantly thinking about them, you want to appeal to that particular audience's beliefs and their values. If you are arguing to a specific audience that you have in mind, you will already know who they are, what their beliefs and values are presumed to be. If you don't know that target audience, you might make a grievous error and they'll shut you down. They might even lock you up depending on the danger. I mean, that could be a component part. And you'll see that a lot in some of the more unstable regions of the world. You have to be very careful about who you're writing to, and you have to always keep in mind what are the beliefs and values, and how can I appeal to those values. And you have to think about, excuse me, you have to think about constructing your thesis to make a plausible case that your reader or audience member can believe. If it's so implausible, they're not going to go there with you, no matter how skilled you are. So you have to really temper and think about your thesis. It might be a grand idea, but you have to really make it refined enough and pull it through and pick it apart. What we call unpacking a thesis. You have to analyze your own thesis so that you can make sure that your audience can go there with you. A reasoned argument is competitive, and by that we mean that other voices are competing for that audience's attention. If you are competitive, you have to think about, how am I going to be the one that says, pick me, pick me, pick me, versus the other topics. And especially when we're talking about joining a conversation, if it's an important enough topic, if it's current enough, if it's relevant and has tension, then other voices will be joining that conversation and they'll be competing with your voice. You want to think about that competitively in your forming your strategies of writing. Your reasoned argument is based on that central claim, which is also called the thesis, and we'll refer to it as a thesis so you're not mixing it up with what claims evidence are. And then claims or reasons are used to justify or to support that thesis. So those claims and evidence that you use together in the body paragraphs, they are meant to be reasons, thinking about that reasoned rational argument, to support your claim, your thesis, your master claim, your master argument. And then you need evidence that will back up that claim. You need to give information that's plausible evidence that has substance to it. That's what you're researching for, is the evidence to form your claims, to support your thesis. And that's how that tandem works. You're going towards the so what. If you don't know what your so what is, you need to rethink. You need to think about, what do I need this audience to do with this argument I'm creating? How do I want them to be convinced? What do I want them to be convinced of? And that's what your so what is. You want to try to influence somebody's thinking to get them to do, to act, to change, to rethink in a different way. All kinds of things are at stake, but if you don't know what that so what is, you need to take time out of your thought process and really think about what you want your audience to do. And you're combining the structure with the strategy. So structuring that argument. So your thesis development is born from your reasoned argument, your reasoning through, constructing a thesis, and developing it through paragraph development, the careful development, the strategic development of structure and strategy. So briefly, thesis answers the question, what are you claiming about a topic that has enough tension and relevance to spend time arguing? Your claims explain and justify the thesis. Why do you hold these beliefs or this belief about this thesis you're constructing? And the evidence, it's information that confirms your reasoning that backs up your claims. So that's the component parts of the reasoned argument. Specifically about thesis development, a thesis has tension in it. If you find my comments, oftentimes you'll see you need a little more tension in this thesis to give you more room to argue out. A thesis is arguable. It needs to be significant enough that you need to spend time arguing it out and proving it defensible. If it's bland, if there's no point to argue it, it really isn't a thesis. It's an idea or an opinion, but it's not an opinion that's worth taking the time to spend reasoning out and making a strategy to get someone to believe it or to prove it. It's a rational process, and I want you to think about that term. A thesis is a process. As you're writing it out, you may need to revise it several times. And that's what you look at when you're at the end of a paper. Generally, when you look at the last moments, if you reread your thesis and reread your so what, just in isolation, forget about the rest of your paper, do they lead one to the other? Or is there a flaw somewhere? If there's a flaw, go back and read your paper briefly, but then change your thesis, because usually your thesis is not quite stating what you've already built through the structure of the rest of your paper. We'll spend more time with that on revision. It's carefully constructed. A thesis is carefully constructed with key terms. If you build key terms into that thesis, those key terms are what you pull out to make into your thesis points that develop in your paragraphs. As you're constructing your thesis and stating it, you want to also, in your mind, analyze it, or what we call unpacking your thesis. You want to analyze that thesis to determine what you must argue within your claims and evidence in your body paragraphs, what you have to argue to rationally and adequately defend that thesis and bring your audience to your so what. The other thing you need to be able to do when you're writing this and thinking about it, you need to identify what claims you need to come up with. What are your claims? And then select the best evidence, the strongest evidence, to explain and interpret out how that claim supports that thesis. Don't forget that interpretation part for the evidence. You want to connect the dots specifically. This information is exactly what I mean by this statement. So consider what facts, information are the best that support your thesis, and if you need to adjust those claims as you're going. So while you're writing, you're always revising. You should be. It should be that practice. What challenges are that I can find to my position? What counterclaims do you have? What counterarguments? How do I need to modify or rethink my thesis or my claims? Or do I need to find different evidence? Do I need to go back to the research mode to find some more or better evidence? And then as you're writing and you come up with some research or some evidence, like, wait a minute, that makes me rethink. Don't throw everything out. Go back and revise your thesis and then tweak throughout your thesis points to adjust, because sometimes that evidence is so compelling that you need to adjust your own argument. What further research you need to do in that process. And remember that to think about those key terms and the points that you need to tuck into your thesis. And that leads us then to paragraph development. I'm sorry, I'm always going longer than I anticipate. I'm sorry for the length of these videos, but I wish if we had in-person time, I'd be babbling on to you anyway. Sorry. So paragraph development. How you're going to arrange, and it's an arrangement, much like a musical score, how you're going to arrange those claims and evidence to best support your thesis. So you want to play with that kind of this how you're going to layer those down. You're framing your thesis support with your audience in mind. So as you're thinking about your audience, what's the most logical progression to build up to that so what? The most effective way I can structure or restructure as you're going through the revision process. You're like, you know what, that doesn't really have that impact at the end that I want it to, but I know I have that in my writing. Play with the arrangement of your paragraphs and use your transition threads. Modify those transition threads. So you're not always just throwing everything out. You're just modifying little tweaks towards greater strength. You want to think about the logical progression. You want something to be coherent and cohesive. So we think about C's when we're writing. Concision and clarity. Clarity is the end-all be-all of writing. Concision, concisely. I never speak concisely, I'm so sorry. But your writing should be as concise as possible with clarity. Coherent, everything coheres together. And cohesive, everything is logical and is all fits together. There's nothing that's an anomaly sitting in your paper. And then you want to experiment with ordering those claims and evidence, as I just mentioned, leading to that conclusion, leading to that so what. The last thing I'll leave you with this week is when you're thinking about both your paragraph development and your thesis development and a reasoned argument, keep open-minded and keep flexible, because the more open-minded you are when you're coming upon your research, the more questions you'll have, the more you can nail down a stronger thesis. But you'll also, if you can stay flexible, your research and revision process will be smoother. Flexibility is the key to this kind of revision process, but it will help you with those developments of paragraph and arrangement so that you can say, you know what, this is a placeholder. We call it a working thesis. Come up with a working thesis that you go back and revise as you go. Keep things as placeholders and then move them around to find the best fit. So again, let me know if you have any questions this week. I'm really excited to read your work. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll get caught up on all the gradebook entries and the discussion posts and your papers. And I hope you have a wonderful week.